Welcome. Good morning, everybody. So great to see all of you. We're about to get started. Hello. I'm Jonathan Dworkin, Vice President for Policy and Communications at NewDEAL. It's so great to see all of you. It has already been an energizing start to the event, and we're looking forward to a great next couple of days of programming. We're excited, of course, to kick off this year's Leaders Conference by featuring a member of one of the first classes of NewDEAL, who will be on stage momentarily. Introducing him, we have another one of our longest-serving New Dealers who we've worked with as a city council member, and now as the mayor of Lincoln, Nebraska, Lyrian Gaylor Baird. Mayor.
Good morning, friends. It's so nice to be back with all of you. This feels like old times. I'm Lyrian Gaylor Baird, Mayor of Lincoln, Nebraska. And as we get started and I have the opportunity to introduce some really special people, I just wanted to start with something that we started doing in my office during the pandemic in 2020. During those most crazy moments, we started every meeting, and we had a lot of emergency meetings back then, with a grateful share, something we're grateful for. And I just want to start by saying that I am grateful for the New Deal. Helen, Debbie, the New Deal team, the amazing board of directors, you have created something very special here at the New Deal. You've brought state and local leaders together to share innovative ideas that grow economic opportunity and that really make a meaningful difference in the lives of the people that we serve. But more than that, you've created a home away for home for us, and you've really created a family. People were talking about the New Deal as a family yesterday, and that is what it feels like to us. It's good to be back with family. Can we just thank everyone for being back together? Well, the campaigns that all of the leaders undertake in order to serve and to be a part of the New Deal, those are contests with clear beginnings and clear endings. But good governance is an art, and it is an art with the opportunity to make an enduring and meaningful impact in the lives of the people that we serve, and to really make an enduring and meaningful impact on the canvas of American life. Developing our capacity to paint a better future for those we serve is why we are here. And we are here in part thanks to the work of New Deal CEO, Debbie Cox Bultan. And like a talented painter, Debbie really has an eye, a keen eye, for local leaders with the potential to have a great impact. And prior to helping launch the New Deal, Debbie served as the executive director of the Civic Leadership Foundation and as national political director and chief of staff at the Democratic Leadership Council. And she brings to this work a really wholehearted devotion to the American Democratic Project, big D and little d. And I think I can confidently say for all of us that we love her. Let's give a round of applause for Debbie. Debbie is surely proud that her keen eye for people poised to make a big impact first brought into the New Deal fold a young mayor from South Bend, Indiana, whose name we all had to practice a lot to get right, Pete Buttigieg, or as we called him back then, Mayor Pete. Mayor Pete's values-based, data-driven, thoughtful leadership and approach to good governance has been and continues to be an inspiration to all of us and an example of what the New Deal is all about. His focus as a leader on ensuring that everyone experiences a true sense of belonging in this country, that all are truly free to pursue lives worth living, rich with opportunity. That was clear when we all first met him years ago, and it's still clear now in his role as Transportation Secretary. And as head of the U.S. Department of Transportation, Secretary Pete has been focused on modernizing the transportation system with goals centered around improving safety, creating good-paying jobs, and advancing equity, climate resilience, and innovation. He's using his work with planes, trains, and automobiles and more to really push forward the values that we all hold dear. In his 2 years with the Biden-Harris administration, Secretary Pete has worked hard to implement a comprehensive national roadway safety strategy to reduce fatalities and serious injuries on the U.S. transportation system. He's worked hard to strengthen our supply chain and respond to the impacts of the coronavirus pandemic. And he's been really busy awarding over $9.5 billion in discretionary funding to over 800 projects in communities across America. Now, you likely know the Secretary as a key leader overseeing the implementation of the bipartisan infrastructure law. The Department of Transportation is now preparing to begin the second year of implementation of that law, following the one-year anniversary of its enactment just a few weeks ago. The impact of these new investments have already been felt in communities across the country. And I can vouch for this because here in Lincoln, Nebraska, we were fortunate and we are grateful to have received a historic $23.6 million RAISE grant to support the design and construction of a new multimodal transportation center that's going to make life better for the people in Lincoln, Nebraska. I'm sure that investments made in your communities are having similar meaningful and enduring and lasting impacts in yours. I want to thank Secretary Pete for his leadership, his service, his sacrifice, and his friendship. And as we welcome both he and Debbie out to the stage, I want to say to both of them, welcome home to the New Deal family.
It's pretty good for the second day of the event, first event of the day
Absolutely.
slot. So thank you for that.
That's all you.
Well, before we get going, I just want to say, first of all, thank you, Larry, and thanks to all of you for the warm welcome. And I just want to reflect that New Deal is a really special organization. I've found, and I'm sure you all have as well, that you have to kind of pick and choose what extracurriculars you're going to do because there are so many events, party events, NCSL, Conference of Mayors, take your pick. You could be traveling every weekend and you could take your eye off the ball. But it's so important to engage with people who are facing the same challenges, the same opportunities, and among all of the different extracurriculars that I decided to do or sifted between, this was one that was really special. And when I reflect on why I always look forward to late November, early December, and that chance to come together, it was, of course, the people, those extraordinary people, Debbie, that you and Helen and the folks behind New Deal have cultivated that really became not just allies, not just partners or colleagues, but friends in so many ways. And it's moving to see the faces of so many friends here around the country. And I'm excited to get to know those who have just come about because, back when I was in local government, I believe that the levels of government closest to home, state and local government, are where most of the action and most of the power is. Now that I'm in federal government, I believe that even more strongly. And we can get into it, but I think that's actually especially true in what we're doing on infrastructure. So I just didn't want to get going without saying that. It's really exciting to be here. So
Well, we couldn't thank you for that. Thank you to Lyrian. What an amazing introduction. And I love all of you so much. And I just echo to what the Secretary's saying about just what a special community this is of people, as we were talking about last night, of doers, of people who get things done, and how important that is where we are in this country right now. So just starting, welcome home, really. I mean, we're so happy to have you. And I want to talk about infrastructure and climate and all kinds of things, but maybe we can just start as your family. How are you? You've 2 years, you've been on this job. How's it going? What are you loving about it? How can we help you?
So, look, it's the best job in the federal government. I mean, it's kind of the best of times and the toughest of times for transportation. Toughest because of all these disruptions, COVID, the main among them, that if you think about it, mean that this season between container shipping, airline cancellations, now rail labor, is the most sustained and various set of disruptions to transportation in the post-war era. But all of those, I think, are temporary. And what's permanent is the work we get to do right now with the investments we're making. So as meaningful work goes, it's as good as it gets. Of course, what's new since I was last at a New Deal gathering is that I'm getting a lot of new sources of meaning at home in the form of our son and our daughter, Gus and Penelope. So today was, yeah, thanks. As you know, in fact, if I were, if that were in my life then, I think half of what I would have wanted to talk to my fellow New Dealers about would have been how you balance that. Because, I mean, this morning I had to do a TV hit at like 6:30, and usually you all parents know how this is, right? The shower sequence for us has to align just so with the feeding sequence for them. And at a critical moment when I realized there was 10 minutes in between one TV hit and another, I was informed that we were out of bananas, and we had to do something about that real quick to get breakfast back on track. But anyway, bottom line, life is good. Hectic, but good, as it is for all public servants, balancing all the things that you balance.
I remember someone telling me before I became a parent that before you're a parent, you think that kids are going to be something that you fit into a busy life, and you quickly realize that you have to fit your busy life into your kids.
Well said. Yeah.
It's like, that makes sense to me.
Yeah, because it turns out they don't care that you're up for re-election. Like, they're not interested in the committee meeting you've got to make it to today, and a hit time on live television means nothing to them. So, and that's probably a very healthy thing, actually.
Yeah, I love that. So maybe we should just dive in. It is a busy day. It's a busy time. So maybe just starting with the rail strike, what's happening. Anything you want to just tell us in terms of updates there?
Yeah. So look, the most important thing obviously is that a rail shutdown not happen. There is no substitute in the American transportation system for freight rail. And if there were a shutdown, with my former mayor hat on, the first thing I'd be worried about is chlorine to the water treatment plants. That's just one example of the things that there's really no way to work around, or not a good one anyway. Whether we're talking about food, agricultural inputs, petroleum byproducts, keeping refineries open, auto factories, and from a left to center perspective, what really concerns me is the prospect of hundreds of thousands of layoffs for workers, including union workers, who might not get their jobs back later on in the economic shutdown that is to follow. So Speaker Pelosi delivered a swift and bipartisan vote in a town that is not known for swift bipartisan votes yesterday. On the House side, now we got to follow that up in the Senate. I'll be with Secretary Walsh at the caucus meeting later today. We'll be talking about the impacts there. I think we can get there. I just hope that everybody understands the urgency of this. The official cutoff date is Friday the 9th, a week from tomorrow. But if you think about what goes into even preparing for the possibility of a shutdown, we really need this on the president's desk by this weekend, or we will start seeing the effects by Monday.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your work on this, and we will keep posted. I do want to just maybe turn to, I think, what a lot of people want us to talk about, which is infrastructure. Yeah. Another situation where we had a bipartisan group come together to get something done.
That one not quite as swift, but very bipartisan.
And so just, we've been talking a lot here just about this historic moment we have with all the funding that you all have been able to deliver to states and localities around the country, and this, really once-in-a-generation opportunity to make a difference on all kinds of things that Americans care about. So we're about a year past the passage of the bill. How's implementation going?
So bottom line is going well. We're about a year in, and what it means is now we're past the stage of just creating these programs, and there are dozens of new programs being created in the transportation department alone, and actually starting to deploy those funds and seeing the impact they can make. And it's everything from bread and butter funds going to roads and bridges to programs that didn't exist before. One that I would draw your attention to is the resilience funding, $6-7 billion, specifically for projects that enhance the resilience of our infrastructure in the face of climate, seismic, and other threats. Opportunities around, some things that will seem obscure if you live in one part of the country, but essential if you live in another, like the replacement of culverts that make it possible for salmon to go upstream. If you're in the Pacific Northwest, it's a huge deal. I learned a lot about anadromous fish passage in this job, and everything in between. There is no part of infrastructure that's not being touched by this programming right now. Airports, rail, ports, transit, trains, highways, bridges. I guess the main thing that I wanted to make sure everybody here is conscious of is the fact that for every dollar that we're picking and choosing in terms of the discretionary programs, and that is a lot, many more are actually going out to the states. And even in terms of the discretionary dollars, that's just a function of what the states and the local communities bring to us. Matter of fact, the whole premise of that, right, is that we're not going to think up all the great projects in Washington, that the ideas aren't going to come from Washington, but more of the funding should. And so it's important for anybody who cares about the implications of this spending, what it means for safety, what it means for land use, what it means for climate, and it is colossal in terms of the impact for climate, what it means for equity, that people are empowered at the decision level that's closer to home, whether we're talking about state plans for how these federal dollars in the formula side will be used, or whether we're talking about city visions that communities, counties, and towns and cities have been wanting to do for years and have not had the chance to do because there isn't the funding. All of our programs are oversubscribed, but we get to say yes more now than we ever have. And so I hope that even though this is a federal program and it's federal funding, that there's a level of understanding that the empowerment of local leaders and local community members is really going to be the thrust of this entire thing. And that's what's so exciting, to work with the people on the ground who are getting it done. I will confess that I miss being on the ground, getting it done, because if we're extremely deeply intertwined with a project, it means I'll see it 2 or 3 times instead of once in person, and more often than not, I'm lucky to see it on paper. But all of that's to say that we're able to do this now at a national level in a way that's going to make such a difference from, Larian was talking about just one project that could be transformative in Lincoln, and I know things like that are happening across the states and across your communities. It would be helpful, and it has been helpful, to have your help in telling the story, because infrastructure takes a minute, right? We're building cathedrals. It's not like a tax policy that the day you sign it, it goes into effect. Some of the things we're doing are of such complexity that if we move at warp speed, they could be done by 2030. Others are happening sooner. But making sure people understand that partnership between the Biden-Harris administration and leaders on the ground is what's getting this new terminal, this road improvement, this bike lanes, the roundabout, the low-emission buses, whatever's coming to you. That's very important for us to sustain the support here in Washington to keep it going. Because even though the bill passed, the president signed it, that was a year ago, there are still decisions to be made about how much gets appropriated into it. And of course, it's not too soon to think about the next turn, where we take everything we have to show for our success in these 5 years to get hopefully more sustained bipartisan support for infrastructure. So that's the short version of the 3 hours I could talk about the answer to your question, but it's an exciting time, and I hope you all feel that too.
Yeah, no, and thank you so much for your leadership on this. I know that this is something we're talking a lot about, again, of just how to make the most of this money in this moment. I'm so glad you talked about the fact that we're not, just the delay in seeing the results is also, I think, frustrating for a lot of leaders. I hear a lot just that, people, the provisions of what's in there are so popular, whether it's roads and bridges or water or all the other things you mentioned. And I think that there was a lot of frustration around Americans maybe not knowing even the bill passed, let alone what's in it. And so.
Yeah, and here's my thinking on that, because there was a lot of consternation. Some poll came out, it was like 25% of Americans know that the infrastructure law passed. But what I've come to realize is the important thing is not understanding what legislative vehicle made it happen. The important thing is understanding that the administration is partnering with local leaders to bring you this thing, right? So if I had to choose between everybody knows that the bipartisan infrastructure law passed on such and such date last year and got signed, but doesn't know that this new container terminal or this safety improvement in their community is connected to the work of this administration, versus the other way around, I'd much rather have it the other way around. So. And I think it's sort of, I think we're actually fairly good at this going into this year as the political conversation picked up. I think it's part of what served us well. But we could be better at it, because there's this alphabet soup now, right? IIJA, BIL, IRA, ARPA. Again, you all can really help folks understand that, this bike trail is in your community because of ARPA. But it's not really about ARPA. It's about the fact that decisions were made here in partnership with work that's going on the ground. And if that part comes through, then I think we'll be in great shape.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think that it's important for people who believe that government has an important role to play in people's lives, that we're out there showing them the government's working.
Yes.
The government's helping them.
In fact, I think building that virtuous cycle of public trust is really imperative. It's why I think the president is right to have kind of cosmic stakes in mind when he talks about democracy versus autocracy as part of what's at stake in something as seemingly bloodless and technical as the efficient delivery of infrastructure projects. Think about the last time that democracy was seriously being debated in terms of is it the way to go or not in the United States, right? In the 1930s, it was acceptable or even fashionable in some circles in this town for people to point to the fascism that was rising across the Atlantic and say, well, you know, there's something to be said for these guys. Like that was a position a lot of people were adopting in elite circles in the United States. And what was it that they said in defense of Mussolini? He makes the trains run on time. Interesting side note, not true, but we can save that for another day. But I don't think it's an accident, right, that an example related to the delivery of transportation services was used to try to vindicate fascism. The contest at the end of the day between systems of government is over how they deliver solutions for people or don't. Similar tug of war going on, I think, with the Chinese model versus our model. So when you get something, when a good decision and good government get something done that people can feel, which again, at the state level, certainly at the local level, is how you build trust. That in turn builds the confidence to get the resources to do more. The opposite is the vicious cycle where government gets starved of resources, can't deliver, and then people say, look, government can't deliver, so let's not give it any resources.
Yeah, I want to come back at the end to kind of the political climate and what we do about that, but I want to get a couple questions in kind of about a little bit more on the infrastructure bill. I've heard you say, or just about kind of where we are with policy generally, I've heard you say that every transportation decision is a climate decision, and I think that that's such an important piece of this, is how we can prepare ourselves for the future in terms of resiliency and climate change. What's your advice to state and local leaders who are out there building transportation systems, thinking about those policy decisions as we think about climate impacts?
Yeah, so first thing I would emphasize is the sector in our economy that contributes the most greenhouse gases is transportation. So transportation has to be the biggest part of the solution if we're going to meet our climate challenges. What does that actually look like? It's mode shifting, so making sure that people have the option of transit, for example, or the option of a train, versus only being able to get somewhere by air or only being able to get somewhere in a personally owned vehicle. It means making those modes of transportation cleaner. That's why we're funding all of these low and no emission buses in communities around the country. And of course, it's why we're huge on EVs. We could do a whole hour on EVs, but like the bottom line is, EVs are coming either way. The reason we think policy intervention is needed is to make sure they're more affordable, to make sure they reach everybody, to make sure they're made in America, and to make sure that it happens fast enough to help with climate. And it turns out, this is the second point I want to make, that this is another example of where a lot of the decisions that matter are actually going to be closer to home. Land use, I mean, what trips you even have to take in the first place because of how your city's designed. That's a huge issue, right? Climate sounds like one of these global things. They go to Sharm el-Sheikh and sign international accords, and so there are times when it may not be obvious what local or state government can do meaningfully to contribute other than just trying to align with doing the right thing. But the reality is that it's going to come down to the decisions that are made close to home. Definitely the way that cities and towns are laid out, the way you organize access to transportation and transit. And by the way, the way you do that at a moment when technology could be profoundly transformative. You know, I come from a city that was just big enough to have a bus system, but not dense enough to have a hub and spoke system work very well, but we didn't have much of an alternative. Now, the kind of technologies that run Uber and Lyft can also run on-demand transit. And I would encourage you to be talking with your transit authorities about that. States, we're working on a rule to require states to keep track of the carbon implications of their transportation plans. Believe it or not, even that is controversial with some states that don't want to, we're not even mandating anything other than we want you to set a goal and we want you to have that goal go down and not up. And even that has been difficult. But of course, what we find is some states are actually ahead of us. Others, we feel like we're pulling them along. The kinds of decisions that the state leaders here make will shape, again, the bulk of how these dollars are used. And the tough reality of our infrastructure law that we're very proud of is, from a climate perspective, it could be one of the best things that's ever happened for climate, it could actually be harmful on net, depending almost completely on how those decisions take place as they go through the states.
Yeah, it's super important, and I think something we're going to talk a lot about later today and tomorrow. I also wanted to, when you came into the Secretary's office, you put together, I think, 5 goals, which I loved for the office, and one of them, which is something that doesn't always get talked about in transportation, is equity. What does an equitable transportation system look like? And again, how should state and local leaders think about that for their cities and communities?
So we think about it in 2 kind of families of issues. First is who gets served by transportation and transit, and the second is who gets to do the work of building it. So I'll talk about the first piece first. It's no secret, although it turned out to be controversial when I mentioned it, that the way that transportation has been built up in this country has often divided communities. Black neighborhoods in particular literally cut in 2. Again, the mere, we can see this just in the way we think and talk about things, because the existence of the phrase wrong side of the tracks tells you everything you need to know about how transportation can divide where it is supposed to connect. Entire neighborhoods are left out of access to transit. And of course, your chances in life, your social mobility, begins with your physical mobility and your ability to get to where education is or to get to where work is. I could give you a million examples, but I'll give you one from my region. There's a neighborhood called Roseland on the south side of Chicago, which is within the city limits of Chicago. There is a town called Roseland next to South Bend, 90 miles east on the toll road. It takes the same amount of time to get to the Loop in Chicago if you have a car and you're driving in from Roseland, Indiana, as it does if you don't have a car and you're taking a bus from the Roseland neighborhood of Chicago. So these are the kinds of inequities that we see, and of course, they often track along racial lines. There's also a rural-urban inequality we have. We can address that now. We can address that by who gets served, where and how we make these investments, paying active attention to this, and the administration throughout is doing just that. And again, a lot of this comes down to the plans that you all bring us. We have an entire fund just for the purpose of reconnecting places that were divided by past infrastructure choices. For example, in Michigan, I-375 cuts like a gash through Detroit. When they put it in, it wiped out the neighborhoods of Black Bottom and Paradise Valley. We're working with the state of Michigan and Detroit to turn it into a boulevard. It's going to be better for everybody. It's going to be better for safety and traffic too, but critically, it is going to be better for the people who had been cut off. So that's part 1. Part 2 is who gets to do the work. We're about to pump $1 trillion through the American economy, half of which is for transportation. If the number of Black-owned, Native-owned, women-owned, Latino-owned businesses 5 years from now in construction and transportation is the same as it is today, then we have failed. If the number of workers of color and the number of women and mothers in the building and construction trades 5 years from now is the same as it is today, we will have failed. And not just failed in terms of equity and justice and doing the right thing, but also we just literally need to ensure that all of the talent in this country is engaged, because the scale of the infrastructure investments we're making right now is such that it is testing the productive capacity of the entire country. It is literally a question of whether there are enough workers and enough raw materials to build all of this on the timelines that we've set out. The answer is yes, but only if we make sure that we actually engage everybody. So that requires a lot of intention. And again, I'm starting to sound like a broken record, but we can only force so much of that at the federal level. It's really going to come down to things like DBE policies at the state and local level. And just because somebody's checking the boxes of federal requirements about making sure your primes looked and saw whether there was a minority-owned firm that they could bring onto a project and did a quick look through the directory and found the answer was no and moved on, versus really pressing them to build and cultivate a world of subcontractors and then see the subcontractors become primes themselves. These are things that you all have enormous influence in getting done. I am convinced that the proportions of the infrastructure bill are so large that economic historians would be able to point to this single package as one of the reasons why racial wealth gaps started to close in the 2020s in the United States of America. If and only if we get this right. And that's an exquisitely interconnected thing between public and private and between state, local, and federal.
I think I want to turn a little bit back to kind of just where we are as a country. You know, one of the things that I've always admired about you, and we all saw it as you were running for president and even as in your roles in administration, is your deep desire to bring the country together, your deep desire to find common ground and to unite us around things that we all have in common, those values we have in common. You famously are the administration person on Fox the most, right? That you're ready, you want to go where everyone is.
I didn't realize that was going to be my specialty. But.
You're very good at it. But you make an effort to go where people are, to meet people where they are. You know, as we think about where we are as a country, this historic moment, not just in all the things we've been talking about this historic moment we have to make a policy change and help people, but also as we were talking about democracy earlier, just, you know, where we are. How do you advise us to think about bringing people together and to find that common ground?
I mean, to me, it all comes back to the just everyday lived experience that is so human. I mean, we just had this marriage vote, and the way that Chasten and I both have talked about it is to talk about it in terms of what it's like in our kitchen on a morning like today, where you're trying to make sure that you know, the kids have their shoes on and get the scrambled egg off of the wall at the same time, and you're just trying to, you know, everybody's just trying to get through life. The whole point of government is to make it a little easier to get through life. I mean, that's why we as a species developed government, right? Is that there's certain things that we just need government to take care of and worry about so that we don't have to. Like, if you had to get up in the morning, as some people now do, and wonder if you could get a glass of clean, safe drinking water out of your faucet that wasn't going to poison your family. If you have to think about that, then you can't think about whatever gives you meaning in life, whether it's faith or enterprise or family or service or whatever. And I think being rooted in that helps us cut across a lot of these barriers that exist in our political and social space. And again, in American political life, it is state and local leaders who are best connected to that reality because the people you serve know where to come find you, right? I'm sure you all have your story. Chasten's favorite is he's at our groceries in Martin's. This is only a year or two after we'd been dating. We weren't even married, but he pulls open the refrigerator door to get some yogurt in the yogurt section. And while he's looking for yogurt, someone's knocking on the glass of the door that he's holding open, scowling at him, saying, "You tell your husband to stop effing up the streets downtown." And we all have our moments like this, right? But precisely because people know where to find you, they come find you when they need help, even if it's an unlikely ideological moment, right? Like, that person could have been a Democrat who just didn't like complete streets. I don't know. And we don't have as much of that, sadly, in Washington as we do at the local level, where you just have to pick up the trash. You have to get these things, these basic things done. It's why I think salvation will come from the local in our politics. And that's what I try to appeal to, whether I'm talking about how to deal with a rail labor dispute or whether we're talking about, you know, why we need to fully fund airport improvements or anything else. And we're removed from that a lot, especially in the Washington echo chamber. And our moment, I think, is largely going to come down to whether we can stay somehow connected to that ground truth, that just everyday life either gets better or it gets worse because of decisions that are made here and because of decisions that are made closer to home. And it's not wishing away ideological division. It's not always about ideological centrism either. It's just about finding ways to get stuff done, which is all anybody expects of us. And that immediate accountability of having to face the people who will benefit or be harmed by your decisions is everything. It's what our system is supposed to cultivate. It gets more and more attenuated as you get further from the local level. And more distorted as we live out these debates in digital spaces. But what I find is that if I'm on Fox News, I'm talking, even if I'm not talking to the person who tuned in, maybe I'm talking to their spouse, who's just tolerating the fact that it's on. But if we're not talking to people, even the people who are hostile, and we can just move them from hostile to negative, let alone the people we can move from negative to neutral and the people we can move from neutral to on board. If we're not talking to them, then how can we be surprised when they reject what we're about? They've never even heard it. Or they've heard like Tucker Carlson's version of it, which can be really different from my version of it, right? So do I want Fox viewers to only know what I'm doing through what Tucker tells them? Or do I want to get out there and tell them directly? But again, I sense that I'm preaching to the choir here, because you have to do this if you're at a state or a local level. You have to in order to get elected. You have to in order to get stuff done. And as you all know, in your experiences, just when you're about to really light somebody up, just blow them up because they're being so difficult, like one of your colleagues on a council or in the State House, and you want to let them have it and you hold back. And then 3 months later, they're the decisive person to help you get some other thing done, and you never saw it coming. We've got to cultivate more of that. And I think we can, and I think we are. I mean, that's definitely how the president thinks about government. Some people have dismissed him for being kind of naive or nostalgic about that. But look, that's how we got infrastructure done. That's how we got chips done. And so the more we can keep that up, and this body is an incredible nationwide network of people who get that, the better off we're going to be.
Yeah, somebody said yesterday about the president, if maybe it's time to think he knows something about politics too.
It would seem so. Yeah.
I maybe just want to end, Secretary, with something that kind of touches on your answer there, which is, just the the act of public service. You're talking to a lot of public servants in this room. You have been one for a long time, and as you talked about the story in the grocery store, I've been doing this a long time, working with elected officials. It's hard out there. It's hard out there right now. The vitriol, the fear, everything else that kind of gets put on to you and to your fellow public servants. They're out there doing it every day. What do you say to them and to those folks who are out there just trying to make a difference, even though it's a really sometimes hard to do?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, thank you for your public service. I mean, there's some of you I haven't had a chance to get to know. There's some of you who came in around the time that I did. There's some who have been at it longer than I have. And as you know, if you've been at it just a few years, the path from being the new, fresh upstart to the grizzled old-timer in our line of work is actually a short number of years. And it asks a lot of you, and it asks a lot of your families. The more you can thank and take care of the people you count on, the better, because they put up with so much. But what could be more rewarding, and what could be more meaningful? And I actually think the very things that make this a brutal time in some regards are what makes the things we do such a choice-worthy path. It'll get romanticized later on. It doesn't feel that way now. A friend of mine suggested this is karmic punishment for ever telling our parents that we envied them for being around in the 60s. Because while that can be romanticized now, it was an incredibly painful time when you didn't actually know whether the Republic was going to come apart at the seams around 1969. And we're in one of those moments where it really matters. It always matters, but it really, really matters now because the durability of our democracy is in question. And those are the very things that make it harder. It's hard to begin with. The hours are punishing. No one here is in it for the money. The pressures are enormous. Many of you are working also in ways that don't have the glamour of the state dinner with the French president waiting for you at the end of the day,
That's going to be fun, though.
I am looking forward to that. I'll admit. It's going to take the edge off everything else that might play out today. No, it's going to be a good day all around. It's going to be a good day all around. We'll have good outcomes and good diplomacy. But the things that make it really tough are the things that make it really worthwhile. And they're the things that are going to really matter when you're explaining to your kids or your grandkids, who, by the way, and we're all loosely in the same generational space, although now I find that there are a lot of much younger people than me in public service. But our kids are going to be old enough to ask us whether we got it done or whether we blew it on climate, on preserving our democracy. We're going to be accountable to a next generation, not just within their lifetimes, but within ours, for whether we got it done. That's what makes all of this matter so much. And it is rewarding, and it is fulfilling, and it is meaningful. There's nothing like it. And if there was ever a season for public service, we're in it. Because books will be written about this incredibly tender and delicate moment in American life that is the 2020s. And for all of that, I think those books could tell a great story. I mean, they could be talking about a country that put its infrastructure back together, that put its social fabric back together through trust that was built partly at the political level through delivery, and that advanced towards something that the world has never actually had, which is a large-scale, like full-scale, completely diverse, multiracial, representative democracy. Like, that's never actually completely happened at scale. And it will only happen for the human species, if it at least in our era, if it happens in America. I mean, that's what we're working on. So I know it might feel disconnected from that when we're having some knockdown, drag-out fight over a budget authorization, but like that's what all of this stacks up to. And we are lucky and unlucky enough to be living and working in the time when that is at stake. And so I hope you take that as propulsion, especially since it turns out most Americans agree with us on many of these things, most of these things. I hope you take that as propulsion when there are all of these headwinds coming at us, because it is, I mean, the climate has never been tougher in our lifetimes. The tone of the online space, political violence rearing its ugly head in America, like all of that is there. I'm not minimizing it. But all of that is exactly why it matters to get this right. And then our kids can be worried about going to Mars or some other cool stuff that will just be fun to watch. So I know you all are in it for the right reasons, and I'm just so thankful that you are, because I know the integrity and the character and the problem-solving style of so many people in this room, and it's never mattered more.
I can't thank you enough for being with us today. So fun to have you back.
I'll take a selfie.
Millennial. I'm not a millennial. I'm not a millennial.